welcome to another video by Liminal Spaces. So, because my brother has done the review of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I thought it was a great time to go ahead and try to tackle Blade Runner, which is a huge subject. So I'm kind of going to follow the same structure that he follows, which is just doing a shorter video, basically introducing it and talking about it a tiny bit, and then doing a deep dive into the film itself, which will come slightly later. I'll probably try to put it up the next day. Like if this goes up today, then I'll put the next one up tomorrow. I'm going to try to just film them back to back, right? But I'll separate them a tiny bit for putting them up. So, we're talking about Blade Runner. Blade Runner, of course, is a 1982 film made by Ridley Scott. It is immensely successful, although at the time of its release, it didn't do nearly as well as people hoped it would. I think that people had very high hopes because they had seen the success of Jaws and Star Wars and Close Encounters and Indiana Jones. I think the first Indiana Jones was out by now. There had been several blockbusters, and some of them science fiction, which is really wonderful, and some of them Harrison Ford projects, of course. Harrison Ford is in the film. I'm going to explain a lot of this. I know that 99.999% of the people who would bother to click on this have seen this movie. Okay. It is super popular. Moyd did a kind of a vote system from the BookTube community, from his community, I think specifically, kind of a voting system where you could vote for your favorite science fiction films. He's done books and also television shows and all that kind of stuff. But for sci-fi films, I believe for the last two times he's done it, 1 and 2 have been Alien and Blade Runner. And they may have flipped spots. It may be like Blade Runner, Alien, then Alien, Blade Runner, or whatever. But Ridley Scott owns the top two of the science fiction genre. Like, he's smashed it. It's incredible. And Alien also counts as a horror film, in my opinion. I mean, it's terrifying. So he's done incredible work, and the films are lasting. They're really incredible. But as I was saying, they didn't do too well when they opened, because I think the people who created it were expecting the next Star Wars. And that is not at all what Ridley Scott made. So it was not a summer smash blockbuster, even though they pushed it like it could be. I mean, there was literally people. It opened on a Friday evening, maybe a Friday morning. It opened on a Friday, and Thursday night, people were sleeping on the sidewalk around the blocks of theaters to get in to see Blade Runner. But word of mouth traveled so quickly after it was released that Saturday didn't do as well and Sunday didn't do well at all. One thing I should bring up at this point is there are several different versions of this film. I think there's at least 4 that I'm aware of. So the film that I'm going to be doing the deep dive into is going to be the final cut. So Ridley Scott, they made the theatrical version. Well, first they had a rough cut, and that's version 1 is the rough cut. And that thing is 4 hours long. It's amazing. If you love Blade Runner, this is what you need to get. Okay, this is a 5-disc set. It's the Blu-ray. There is a 4K version of Blade Runner. I believe it's the final cut that is the 4K. But this gives you the original rough cut. It gives you the theatrical release, and then it gives you the director's cut, and then it gives you the final cut. And it also has a massive documentary on Blade Runner on it, which is wonderful to watch. If you love Blade Runner right now, this is what you need to pick up. Hopefully in the future they'll do a 4K version of something like this. But for now, this I think is the ultimate Blade Runner box. So, for the original theatrical release, people were very confused. And that's weird because they went from the rough cut and they showed that around and people were very confused and didn't understand. So they did a bunch of overdubs and stuff that they put into the film to try to explain it. And yet people seeing it, and they cut it way down, right? It wasn't 4 hours long in the theaters. It was probably under 2 hours, to be honest. They cut it way down. They put a bunch of overdubbing over it. That's the version that I saw originally. It's got crazy lines like, and these are overdubs, right? Like, sushi, that's what my wife called me, raw fish. Right? I mean, just terrible, terrible, weird things. Just to try to, well, two things. Number one, to try to explain what's happening in the movie. And number two, to try to make it more of a film noir, make it film, in my opinion, to make it try to feel more actiony. And I think that it failed in those areas. I don't think the overdubbing really worked. And I'm very glad that when Ridley went on to do the director's cut, he took all that stuff out. There was no need for it. He never got back to 4 hours, of course, but he did add a few small things. The unicorn was added in and that kind of stuff. But it didn't do great in the theaters at the time, but slowly over time it has built up a huge fan base. It is obviously a very, very successful, important science fiction film, and it's influenced tons of movies since then, right? Anytime you see this kind of dark, neuromancer sort of looking world, Blade Runner is a tiny piece of that, right? Blade Runner is a tiny piece of neuromancer. Straight up. There's no way to deny that, along with many other things. I wouldn't want to say neuromancer would never exist without Blade Runner, because that's way too extreme, right? But Blade Runner is influential. It's big from 1982, And also at this time, another reason that the film didn't do quite as well as it probably could have is because 1982 is an incredible year for science fiction films. It's insane, this list of movies. And I know it's because everybody wanted a blockbuster, right? Every studio was pushing for a blockbuster. So listen to this list. I wrote some of these down. This is crazy. E.T., The Thing, Star Trek II, Wrath of Khan, Poltergeist, Conan, Road Warrior, Tron, Beastmaster, which didn't do really well, but that's one on my radar, so I thought that was kind of fun. Beastmaster came out then. E.T. alone destroyed every film that came out in 1982. Nobody had a success because E.T. existed. But when you look at this list, what an amazing year for film. Seriously, especially for science fiction. And that's not even going into the other stuff like Officer and a Gentleman or Fast Times at Ridgemont High, right? There are other successful films that weren't science fiction, but this list is incredible. It's just incredible. So Blade Runner never stood a chance in 1982, right? But it's endured. It's gone on, which is really, really excellent. So that's just kind of a little bit about the release of the film. Ridley Scott himself has gone on to do other things. I am not a huge Ridley Scott fan, to be perfectly honest. I love Alien and Blade Runner. Like those two films, Alien specifically, I mean, because you had to see him in the theater, right? You had to go, because if you didn't see it in the theater, you would never see it again, ever. Now, of course, that changed in the early 80s, right? Suddenly, there was HBO, and there was VHS tapes, and beta, and all that kind of stuff. So, it changed quickly, but in 79, right, if Alien's coming out, You need to go see it. If Star Wars is coming out, 77 or whatever, you need to go see it, right? So I saw Alien in the theater. It destroyed me because of my age. And then I saw Blade Runner in the theater. Absolutely fell in love with it. To the point that I was actually slightly disappointed by E.T., to be honest. And I love E.T., it's one of my favorite movies of all time. But at the time, it wasn't scary, it wasn't dark, it wasn't mysterious. It's pure heart. E.T. is pure heart. And I missed some of the scariness and the Ridley Scottness, right? But after that, he goes on. I think his next film is Legend. And then as he goes on, his movies are successful, but I've just not been a big fan. I didn't love Gladiator, right? It was just kind of boring. I hate to say it. And the new Alien stuff, just haven't been into it all. I feel like he kind of took a turn from visually stunning to I've got something I want to talk to you about, which is a very different thing, right? I want to just watch in amazement. I don't want to listen in amazement. But yeah, so Ridley Scott owns it with these first two films. Incredible, untouchable, still to this day, the greatest science fiction films ever made. So let's move on to just kind of a basic overview of the plot. I'm not going to do any spoilers here, nothing big that will ruin anything. That will be in the deep dive. There's going to be a billion spoilers, even though everybody's already seen the movie, just to say out loud. So the film is about a cop, and this cop's job is to kill robots, or in the film they call it replicants, to kill replicants if they come to Earth. They are not allowed on Earth. He refers to it, and the film refers to it as retiring them. He doesn't kill them, he retires them. And they bring up all kinds of wonderful philosophical points throughout the film, mostly from Rachel. Rachel's another character in the film. She's asking things like, have you ever accidentally retired a human instead of an android, instead of a replicant? Have you ever taken a test to see if you're a replicant, right? There's weird questions that are brought up throughout the film, which is really kind of neat. So this group of robots goes berserk, kills a bunch of people. They come to Earth because they want to talk to the person who made them. And the person who made them is on Earth. So they come to Earth, and it's this cop's job to kill them. Kind of bleak, right? It's a dark film. It's a dark subject, especially for 1982. That's an interesting point that they bring up in the documentary in this big box set. Is the 70s were a very dark time for America in general. The end of the 60s through the 70s with a recession. The Cold War, of course, was raging, and things just weren't looking good. And by the time we got to 1982, people wanted happy movies. They wanted E.T. They were begging for E.T. And it exploded, of course. It was so good. It was so well made. And it's exactly what people wanted. It made a fortune, right? It destroyed everything else in 1982. So a film this dark and this heavy was doomed from the get-go for 1982 because we really wanted to be in a positive space at this time. Ronald Reagan had been elected, and he was talking about America's going to be prosperous again. Everybody's going to have a job. Everybody's going to be making money. The American dream will thrive, things like that. So Blade Runner was a hard film to kind of stomach at that time, exploring these deep ideas about what is human. So some of the themes in this are corporate America, right? There's this mega corporation that basically rules LA. They do these big shots of LA, and it goes on as far as you can see in thousands and thousands of buildings. But right in the middle is this huge pyramid that it dwarfs everything. And that's the Tyrell Corporation. And the Tyrell Corporation runs everything, right? Specifically, what we see is replicants, right? They make the replicants. And the replicants do all kinds of off world work. They run the mines, they are soldiers. They, even one of them is said to belong to a murder squad, whatever the hell a murder squad's for, right? I mean, it's bleak, it's dark, and this corporation is controlling everything. And I feel like that has really become an enemy in America in our science fiction because we're a capitalistic society, and of course, the worst thing that a capitalistic society could have is a monopoly, right? Monopolies destroy capitalism. Monopolies destroy competitive behavior. They destroy our ability to start our own companies and become successful and pursue the American dream. So this mega corporation was this sort of terrifying beast. And it's in tons of science fiction, before Blade Runner and after Blade Runner. You know, giving somebody that much power and giving them that much money, it's just dangerous. And that's one of the big themes in this film. Another theme in this film is empathy, which I do think does tie back to the novel, right? This idea of how should you feel about these creatures that have been created that are so much like us that we can't tell the difference. We literally can't tell. You have to do this incredibly complicated void comp test, and there are parts in the film where they literally question if the thing's working, you know? Right? That's a major theme. What do you do with these creatures? So that's my basic kind of rundown of the film, the themes and the plot. So now just to rate it, right? For science, I'm giving the thing a 10. Like, the science is just through the roof. You've got these crazy robots that are being made. You've got crazy flying cars that are going all over the place. They're talking about off-world stuff and on-world stuff. There's a lot of interesting, and even boiling it down to some of the tactics throughout the film, right? Some of the choices that the characters make in order to progress the plot along, I think scientifically are pretty valid and cool as well. So I'm going with a 10 for science. They really smashed that category. Same thing with philosophy. I'm going with a 10 for philosophy, right? This whole idea of what happens if you make a living being. And of course, the philosophy of the American dream and mega corporations and that kind of stuff. So 10 for philosophy, really excellent. For heart, I think this is the weakest part of the film. I think I'm going to go with a 6 for heart. And the reason I say that is because where this film should have heart, it doesn't. And I'll go into that in the deep dive. I don't want to do a bunch of spoilers here. And where this film doesn't really have to have heart, it does. And that kind of mix-up is a problem. And I feel like that's another thing that kind of affected the success of the overall film. But I'm not going to go too much into it here. I'm just going to say, for heart, it's probably just a 6. It's not the greatest. And then last but not least is awe, right? Awe of the universe, awe of what's possible, what could be out there, what could we as humans discover or create, right? Just the general science fiction that blew my mind, right? The mind blowingness of this film. I'm going to go with, I think I'm going to go with an 8. Yeah, I think it's pretty mind blowing. It's pretty cool. It's all on Earth, right? There's no space stuff or aliens or anything like that, but it's cool. It's really cool and kind of mind blowing. So we'll go with an 8. So we've got 10, 10, 6, 8. So that is 34. So I think an 8 I think an 8 does well for this movie. For me, because of nostalgia, right? I can't escape it. This thing has to kind of be a 10 for me, right? Because of when I saw it and all that stuff. I can't get away from it. It's just incredible. So I'm gonna, for me, a 10, but just in general, trying to step back and be really honest about it, I think the film's probably an 8. If you hadn't seen it, right? If you're that one person out there who hasn't seen the movie, don't walk into it thinking that your brain's just going to explode open and your whole life will change, because that's probably not true. But I honestly, truly believe that if you like science fiction at all, you will love it. It's easily an 8. Easily. All right. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoy this, click the like button. And if you want more like this, definitely subscribe. We got a ton. We got a ton more coming. And keep an eye open for the deep dive into the film, because there is a lot of stuff that I really want to bring up, but I don't want to shock people by clicking on, hey, Blade Runner, and seeing that it's an hour and a half long, right? This is just kind of a primer. This, right? So you know something big's coming, and it's cool. I'm probably going to film it right now, to be perfectly honest, but I will put it up soon and give that a check out as well. Thank you very much.